Hey guys, what's going on? I got some free time today, so I figured I'd go ahead and do one of those videos I said I'd do in the previous video. We'll go ahead and take a look at one of my cars today, and that car today is going to be the 2000 Crown Victoria P71, or as I like to call it, the Tank. Alright, so the Ford Crown Victoria. This car spanned from 1998 to 2010, or 2011 at least, in this particular body style. The example that I drive is from the year 2000, so I'm driving a car that's 20 years old, give or take. It comes from the era of the NPI engine, which means non-performance improved. In 2001, Ford updated the heads on the 4.6 V8 that this car has to the PI version, which gave it a little bit more horsepower and hence was called performance improved. So anything before 2001 on a Crown Victoria is a NPI engine block. Means this car has slightly less power than its newer brothers or sisters, I don't know. But it doesn't really make itself apparent up until about the 2004 year, where they started doing things like adjusting the MAF sensor, giving it a bigger air intake. Then the car started seeing horsepower around 250 or so. Going into the 2006 and later years, that's also when the Crown Victoria got a digital dash and other more modern accessories. This car probably has somewhere in the ballpark of about 210 horsepower. The 1998, 99, and 2000 versions were very similar to their civilian counterparts, save for like this headlight, or not headlight, spotlight setup that it has and other little police goodies. The big differences between a police interceptor and a civilian model is not really that big of a difference. There's a better oil cooler on it. There's higher ground clearance, I think by about 1 inch. It's got heavier duty components, so bigger and beefier suspension. But in terms of the motor's the same through the whole series of cars, be it the civilian version or the police version. As a matter of fact, this engine's actually shared with other vehicles. The 4.6 liter V8 modular was thrown in the Ford Mustang, Ford F-150, I believe also even their Econoline series of vans. So this motor is very common, which means it's very easy for me to get parts as long as it's an NPI version. I could do a motor swap if I really wanted to, but that isn't in the cards for this car unless the motor actually really just decides to take a dump. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But as I said, this particular car is 20 years old. I did some research and there were some obvious signs. This car served with the city of Chula Vista down south near San Diego. Its unit number was 1265 as far as I can ascertain. There's a unit number sticker inside the car still, and it matches what's on the front. Also, there's inside the door here a little tag that says this was property of the city of Chula Vista. It also had a service tag for miles and things like that. It does look like that was removed. That's a pretty common thing to do to the police interceptors once they leave fleet service, to delete the fleet details of the vehicle so you don't know what it's been done to or anything like that. But there were modifications made to this car anyway. The J-mod to the transmission, which just gives the vehicle a little bit easier shifting ability and makes it a little bit jerkier. It also has better suspension. Even though the police interceptor had better suspension to start with, it's still fairly floaty. So we ended up getting some Bilstein Mustang shocks and throwing them on the car, and it does really well. The previous owner that that had this vehicle did a lot of these mods. The only mods that I've really done so far were a custom tune from Moe's Speed Shop out on the East Coast, and I also got some tubular steel rear control arms to stiffen up the rear end. Outside of that, it's just been regular service to the vehicle, as well as some replacements. The rear end has been worked on slightly. The rear axle shaft on the passenger side has been replaced, and both axle shaft bearings have been replaced on this vehicle. But for 20 years old, I really can't complain. Still, overall, this is a pretty good car. If you ever want to get a Crown Victoria Police Interceptor, I mean, as long as you're pretty decent with the mechanic works, it's probably fun to have. Otherwise, I'd probably recommend getting a civilian one, but on the whole, these V8s do eat a lot of gasoline. My rear end is actually a 355, which is a option for these vehicles. It's also a locking differential. It's called a track lock, I believe. And it gets a little thirsty sometimes, so if you want a fuel efficient car, this is not the car that you're looking for. But, you know, slap some mufflers on the back and do a couple little modifications to the car, and you have a little fun kind of boat that will get off the line pretty quick. It's got decent torque. So as long as you can find one that's not beat to death, which is going to be very hard in these times because most police departments have already gotten rid of their police interceptors, and the ones that they have left are probably their very last models, which means they've been ran out to the very end. I've seen some vehicles at auction with over 200,000 miles on them, plus how many thousand idle hours they have. As I said earlier in another video, 1 hour of idling is supposed to be 33 miles of driving, so basically take whatever mileage your car has and double it, and that's probably the amount of mileage that a police interceptor actually has. Still, it's a good car. I would recommend it, as I said, if you're good with working on cars. It's fairly straightforward. The only other thing I really want to show you is maybe some driving, so we'll flip it over and I'll get this little GoPro up on the push bar of the car, and I'll take you guys on a little trip. Sound good?